So, welcome to the City of Littleton Planning Board. Tonight we have a study session, and we have 3 items, and we'll get right into it. So, we'll let Glenn introduce the first part.
Sure. Thank you. We have Don Elliott with Clarion Associates, who's going to give you an update. We sent out the assessment that his firm did on our zoning code. It's perfect, doesn't need anything.
Yeah, easy reading.
Easy reading.
I'll be out here by now.
Lots of illustrations.
Just give us a check.
Just to give you a little background, we do have a zoning ordinance review committee. Actually, Ken Field is here. She's one of the members of that committee. So you're going to really see the same, and of course, Mark Renecki, emeritus member.
Well, we really don't have to do anything more than that.
No,
You're off.
it's perfect.
So with that, I'll turn it over to Don. He can run through the
All right.
presentation and ask you any questions.
Well, I will ask some questions at the end, but this is a brief overview just to introduce ourselves and introduce the process, make sure everybody's on the same page. But we are very interested in your comments about what you would like to come out of this process. So without further ado, let's just go through a brief review, talk about who we are a little bit and the way we're approaching the project, talk about some issues at the end that we can decide to address and not address, and then just have some questions and answers. Some of you may know who we are. I'm a director with Clarion Associates. We are a national consulting firm. We are based in Denver. We have an office in Chapel Hill and also affiliates in Cincinnati and Philadelphia. Not as big as people think. We throw a big party at the American Planning Association conference every year, and everybody thinks we're a huge firm because it's a big party, but it's only about 18 people. We're planners, attorneys, landscape architects. We have done different types of code work for over 130 communities in the U.S. And Canada, and I do international work as well. We're often asked to do sustainable codes that integrate, and sustainability means whatever you want it to mean, but things that reduce carbon footprints, increase energy conservation, increase water conservation, urban agriculture, things that citizens in many communities are wanting to see and feel good about their community doing something about. And trying to reduce, promote smart growth and reduce carbon footprint is a fair amount of woven into a lot of what we do. This is your team, me, and Tarek Wafai. Tarek is formerly worked for the Department of Local Affairs, doing kind of a circuit rider code person around Colorado for smaller communities. Been with us a couple of years, a very, frankly, rising star in planning and zoning work in Colorado. You will hear more from him in the future. And I am a director. I've authored a couple books. I've written one called A Better Way to Zone. If you are in favor of simple codes, you'll love my book. If you like complicated codes, you'll hate it, because I'm a big fan that big believer that zoning is more complicated than it needs to be in order to get the cities we want to get. Also done some books on form-based zoning. No one has asked us to do a form-based code in Littleton. We're not aiming to do a form-based code, but it's really not an on-off switch. Most new codes have some tools in them that do a better job of shaping urban form than we did in the past. It's a spectrum. And that's what we learned when we wrote the book. Every city picks and chooses the things they either like or don't like out of the toolkit. That's what they do. And I'm also the editor of the State Land Use Planning and Law book. Anyway, these images are just up there to tell you that every new code that is written has a lot more illustrations, a lot more pictures, a lot more tools for people who are visual learners. My goal, although I seldom achieve it, is that when we're done, the code ought to be understandable to somebody with a high school education. That's what I think governance is actually about, is trying to help people know what they can do with their property, what their neighbor can do with their property, what might happen on the corner of the 7-Eleven when it's torn down, what could happen there. So I don't like jargon. I do like pictures. I do like graphics that illustrate what can happen and what can't. And every new code, even though they're different graphic styles, we'll have to talk about which ones Littleton wants, but even though they're that way, all of them are more graphic than they were in the past. This process was laid out. We have now done a kickoff, a set of meetings with the staff to go through kind of almost, Tarek went through almost page by page to say what can we fix on this page. And then did an assessment, which Glenn introduced to you. One of the hardest things about this process, this is not a normal process for Clarion. Often we are asked to just rewrite the whole code. That's not what our job has been so far here, because funding is coming in slowly. Basically, Glenn said, how can you fix what I think are our biggest problems, and then we'll see. If we build some momentum, there might be more funding later to do the rest of the job. But it's important for the Planning Commission to know the two things that we have been asked to do with the available funding right now is the uses. The lists of permitted and conditional and prohibited uses in the city are very, very out of date. We came to the same conclusion when we did the assessment. If you read the assessment, you'll see that. But to be honest, it first came up with Glenn saying, that's what I really need fixed. I need it fixed. And so task 3 is to prepare a staff draft. We prepare that. What we think can be done, most new codes use fewer, more flexible, broader use categories that are more robust. They don't get out of date quite as quickly. You don't get obsolete things in there or micromanaged uses, which tend to accrete in a code, which make it harder to administer. So in general, when you think about a code as a big grid of what the zone districts are, what the uses are, the number of listed uses is shrinking in most new codes, and that's what we've recommended in this rewrite. I have yet to have a client ask me to make their uses more complicated and more fine-grained than what they are now. After we do a staff draft, we run it by staff to make sure we haven't stepped in a bucket and said something that is not true or inaccurate, or yes, Don had said that, but that's not what we do. And then we put out a public draft. The next thing, after straightening out the uses that we've been asked to do, is to restructure the code and reorganize it to get a framework that is more logical and easier for people to find information in. When we put that together, and so tasks 5 and 6 are putting out a draft of the reorganized structure and then a public draft. And when we do the staff draft to make sure we haven't made mistakes, then we do a public meeting. And we'll vet this through the advisory committee as we go. So those are the two big pieces, uses and the overall structure. So at the end of the funding that Littleton has given us so far, we expect to produce a complete document. It won't have Swiss cheese holes in it. The uses, and I'll talk about that more in a minute, will be new. They will have been revised and footnoted so that every change, yes, this is now allowed, no, this is not allowed, we used to call it X, now we call it Y. They will all be footnoted so that we don't get accused of blowing something by somebody. We don't want that. There'll be a lot of footnotes, and then they'll come out when you adopt it. But we try to say these are all the changes. The uses will be new. The rest of the materials will be carried over from your current code, reorganized, shuffled, put in the right place so that like things are near like things. And if we find direct conflicts, we will work them out. We will say, look, we had to go left or right, so we went left, and here's why. If there's a gap, look, these never meet. They answer question A and they answer question C, but they don't answer question B, which a lot of that happens when you reorganize a code. You realize this stuff doesn't meet in the middle. There's a lot of questions which would leave staff scratching their heads because it's not answered. We will recommend, we don't want to give you something that's imperfect. We will say, look, well, you weren't paid to rewrite just to make one up, this parking section right now. But as it is, we have discovered that you're going to have a hard time administering it until this is fixed. Our interim fix is that you ought to go left, you ought to go right. The answer to question B is this. Put it in a footnote. If people disagree, then you can amend it before it's adopted and say, well, take it out, Don. That was a bad judgment call. Or go the other way. But we try to adapt gaps and inconsistencies, but everything except the uses will not be rewritten. We'd love to do it. Glenn has kind of said if this goes well and council and you guys think we're doing a good job, we'd love to keep going, but we don't have the funding to do all of it at this point. So you will have a new document, completely reorganized, hopefully gaps and inconsistencies addressed. And when I say the uses will be new, what that means is the table will consolidate the uses into more permitted, the list of all the things you can do by right or by conditional permit, conditional use, or you can't do in Littleton, will be up to date and new and more administrable and clearer as to what's included in each one. That list will be new. Each one of those will have a definition. So part 1 is the table of uses. Part 2 is make sure all the uses are defined and that those definitions are current. Part 3 is, in many cases when you do a use table, you try to list consolidated way in a modern table. You list all the uses, you say where you can do it, when you can't do it, whether it's conditional use. The right-hand column says, oh, but in this case there's some special conditions. I'll just make one up for you. Bed and breakfasts are fine, but they can't have public events after 10 o'clock at night. Retail in this district is just fine, but not with a footprint greater than 15,000 square feet. We're happy with small stores. We're not happy with big stores in this district. So there are use-specific standards that go with some, but not all of the uses. So when I say the uses will be new, this new structure will show a new table of uses. There will be new definitions for the uses that have changed, that there's a problem with. If you've got definitions now and they're fine, we'll just carry them over. And the use-specific standards will be collected from various places in the codes. Usually you find those okay buts all over the code. They're buried here and buried there, and somebody just added them into some place. We collect them all, we organize them so that a reader of the table will say, okay, I can or can't do it. Oops, this one's got a right-hand column. I better go read that right after the table as to whether it's okay in my circumstances or not. So that is what we mean by new uses. Here's our timetable. The scope that we have been given runs from December through October. The work I just described, a revised structure and new use content, the rest of it carried over, is laid out in a series of basically every 2 months, trying to put a staff draft of a different part of this on the table and then meet with the advisory committee. I personally am happy to meet with you guys anytime you'll listen to us. We never give up the chance to brief the planning folks. So, but that's, and SD means staff draft, PD means a public draft. So just so you know, because you'll want a chance to review and chew on it, we're doing the uses first so that goes public, and I predict that you will want to have some discussions about that over the next several months, whether we got it right, whether we got it wrong. But you can be doing that while we do the rest of the reorganization work, and then by the time we plug the new uses into the new structure, it will have gone through some vetting and some discussion among the advisory committee and you and anybody else that wants to. We do not advise you to try to adopt a revised code in part. I will suggest that when we get to the end, you will have a decision to make. Glenn may already have made a decision on this, whether we try to adopt the new structure with the new uses, but at least then it'll all run. You turn the key and the engine will run, and there'll be a complete code. Or you say, no, by that time we will know we've got some other things to do. Let's hold off and not ask council to review it, but let's do the rest of the work or some more work before we bring it forward. Don't. So if the question is, Don, should we adopt the uses without the rest of it? No, you should not. It doesn't work. It's a square peg in a round hole. You can't kind of do it in a piecemeal structure. It works as part of a new structure. There's where we're going. So I have covered verbally some of the things the slides are doing. So basically, again, here's our three things. Now we're doing uses, which means the table, the standards, and the definitions, and then reorganizing is the second part of it. That's an example of a use table, the little graphic there. Sometimes they use P for permitted, C for conditional, blank for none. Sometimes they use black circles for permitted and tan or gray circles or half circles for others. And this right-hand column is where you put in the conditions that are cross-referenced afterwards. In the assessment, we have recommended how we think your code should be restructured. This is not the same as we do in every community. There is no norm, but many of them turn out similar in the following way. Almost every code has a chapter of boilerplate at the front. This is adopted under the following powers given to us under the laws of Colorado. And here's how we handle applications that are in the pipeline but haven't been dealt with yet. Here's how this code relates to restrictive covenants. There's just background boilerplate that happens. We are recommending that Chapter 2 have a description of all of the all of the zoning districts. It not list all the uses that are available in each one, and it not list all their heights and setbacks and open space requirements. It is just a description of the menu of things, their intent, and if there are anything specific to that, something unusual about the regulations in that district, it occurs there. But this allows you to read and just go through and say, okay, what are the districts? What are the different intents? Do I think they're right? Do I think we're missing one? Chapter 3 is where we would do what I said, the use table. So we really find that one way to make codes shorter and clearer is not to repeat those uses over and over again. It just begs you to do inconsistent things down the road. So put them in one table. It also helps you when somebody comes in and says, I want to add a new use. You're much less likely to add something and then have it be so similar to something that's already on the books that nobody knows whether they were intended to be different or not. It helps you know where to put it and whether you've already covered it or whether with a minor amendment you could just make an existing use cover this new thing. So that, all the districts, across all the districts, what can I do with my property is covered in Chapter 3. Chapter 4 is all what I'd call the quality, the layout, parking, landscaping, lighting, circulation, if you want to have certain water conservation. Anything that has to do with not what can I do with my property, but how good does it have to be in Littleton? How do I lay it out? Does the parking, can I put it in front of the store? Do I have to put it behind the store? Do I have to put it to the side of the store? Are there anything about, do I get credit for being near bus lines and I can put in less parking than I did before?
Setback, heights, et cetera.
Setbacks in
Does
there
that
too.
go in 4?
Yes, it does, yes. So things like height and setbacks go there too, and we'd like to, good question, we'd like to organize them by tables too, because it helps investors and people who are coming into your community understand, I really need a facility this big, which of the zone districts should I look for property in without flipping over and say, let's compare setbacks, heights, lot coverages, maximum building or site areas across the district so that you can say, all right, I'm looking for some of these. These are the ones I need to look for if I don't need to go for a variance. So that's in Chapter 4. 5 is whose permission do I need? Is it just a permit out here at the one-stop shop? Do I need to go to Planning Commission? Do I need to go to Planning Board? Do I need to go to City Council? Who do I need to go to? What is the process for reviewing this? And most cities, when we get to that point, every city asks us to streamline that if possible, to figure out how to do more with less. I like doing that work. It's the unsexiest part of zoning, but I like it because it turns out, I think it helps the citizens an enormous amount to know how their government operates and what's the story going to be if I need this type of approval or I want that type of approval. So when I say that many codes are similar, it's because most of the new codes have a chapter that says, what can I do on my land? Another chapter that says, how big can it be and how good does it have to be? And another chapter that says, whose permission do I need to do this? So 3, 4, and 5, in various ways, it's been a while since I wrote a code that didn't do that. So I'm admitting there are similarities to this just because I think a lot of our clients see the logic in doing that, and it makes it shorter. Nonconformities is simply how do we treat properties that were legal when they were built? Now they're not legal due to no fault of the owner. The city changed its rules, CDOT took the land, somebody did something for the good of Littleton, but the result of it is Don's property, which was perfectly legal when he started it, is no longer legal. How does that treat it? We can have a discussion when we get to that point. Again, it's not part of what we've been given funding for so far, but I'll telegraph. Most cities that rewrite their codes decide to lighten up on that a little bit because there's a feeling that even though technically some things, quote unquote, don't belong here, that often involves trying to shut down or make life hard on an existing business that employs existing people. And most large and medium-sized cities are saying, you know, that's, I'm not sure how hard we want to make it on people who actually employ and conduct good business in our community. Maybe we want to lighten up and let them reinvest in that. And so that's a new area. And then definitions, which goes without saying. Definitions, you've got to have them. Got to have them. They ought to be good. We've got an 800-page document on my computer of every definition we've ever drafted. So we try to figure out which ones are missing. I like simple definitions, but if you're going to consolidate uses into fewer, broader categories, you really need to know what's in and out of those categories. And so we spend some time on definitions. As I said, in the assessment, that's what we've been paid to do or we're under contract to do. In the assessment, we were asked to say, what should we do next? After these two. Our recommendations were, look at your lineup of zoning districts. As I said, you've got a use table like this that looks like this graphic, where down the left-hand side in categories and subcategories, you have listed the different types of uses that are available in Littleton. The right-hand columns are the narrow columns are all of your zone districts. And the next, what are the districts and what can I do in them are basically the backbone of zoning. So we're doing part of that work at this part, but it behooves you to get the skeleton right before you start working on some of the other things. And so our recommendation is After we've looked at the rows and tried to update them and see what makes sense for Littleton, we look at the columns and see, do you need new ones? Do you need a new, I'm making this up, a new mixed-use zone district? Do you need something else? Or are there some that are so similar that it just doesn't make sense to keep them separate? The reason behind their creation of almost similar zone districts is lost in the mists of time. We want to get rid of that. So that is, the next thing after that would be to look at your procedures. I have not been told that Littleton's procedures are gummed up, that they are unintelligible. I sometimes hear that the moment I walk in the door. Nobody knows how we do business. We're not even sure how we do business. I have not heard that here. But, as I've said, I think that is an area where most people don't kind of think about holistically. Are there ways to streamline this thing that would make more sense and allow us to do business more transparently and more predictably? Again, it gets at this, whose permission do I need, and are we doing that well? Finally, the last thing would be the development standards, the quality standards. And I'd be happy to have your feedback on it. Our review of the current code looks to us like you have been pretty good at adopting new development standards, landscaping and quality, and that those have been updated somewhat more regularly than the uses. And so that's why it's last. It's not that it's not important. Our first reading of it is they seem to be less out of date than some of the other portions, and that's why we've listed it rather not at the top but at the bottom. Glenn asked me one day, "What about signs, Don?" And I said, "I didn't hear that." No, our recommendation is that if you do signs, you do them on a parallel track with a working group that is only looking at signs, because if you try to mix it in with this stuff, there's a fair probability that you'll spend an awful lot of time on things that are not fundamental to getting the basic zoning right. It's not unimportant, but, and I'll say this in this group, I have been in situations where the money behind signs and the industrial interest behind signs are so powerful that they capture the zoning process. And so I always advise people, if you want to talk signs, get a group together and have them talk signs. But it is not going to hold up or implicate the rest of the zoning update process. I think without exception, the places I've given that advice have taken it, and of those who took it, all are happy they took it. I've had people call me up and say, we didn't think you were right, but you were right. We should have done it this way. So signs is not on the list for that reason. Let me briefly, the last slide, just in terms of general things we've learned in doing this for 20 years across 100 communities is we have to listen. The door is never shut. We often give deadlines. We'd like you to review. We'd like to get the public comments back 2 months after we put a draft out. What if I don't? Well, we work for you. We'll take the comments anywhere along the way, but the sooner you get them to us, the faster we can try to roll them into the process. So are there deadlines? Yes. Are they firm? Not really. The only time it's firm is when City Council decides to vote on the thing. Until it gets to that point, we work for the public and we work for you, and if people make comments, we will take them. Don't keep producing draft after draft. This process I've laid out, put a staff draft on the table, let people comment on it. Put a staff draft, correct that, then put a public draft on the table, and when people comment, we'll talk to Glenn and the staff, you guys, we'll correct what needs to be corrected based on public comments. That's it. We don't produce draft 1, draft 2, draft 3, draft 4, first of all, because it would blow the budget. And secondly, people can't go to that many meetings. They get bored to tears. And when the reasonable people get bored and go home and watch television, it leaves the debate to people who are there with an axe to grind, unreasonable people. And so in order to keep the reasonable middle ground of America paying attention, you've got to say, look, I want you to read this draft and comment on it. There's not going to be another one that's better until we get to the end of the process. So read this one. Maintaining momentum. Occasionally we get accused of rushing the process, and not just on the schedule that I've put out in front of you. Very rarely, once again, zoning is hard and detailed, and it's easy to get bogged down. And once you get bogged down, the reasonable voices leave the room. So we really try to stay on schedule and keep it moving. That's one way you get people to keep paying attention. Side conversations, if somebody tries to capture the if an issue comes up and it's really complicated, I don't think it will, then we create another side group to deal with it and take that discussion on its own. But side conversations also means if somebody, we ask everybody to send their comments to Glenn. Glenn will send them on to me. We'll talk about them. If somebody sends me their comments without copying Glenn, I'm going to turn around and forward it to Glenn. staff has to know what the conversations are out there. This is almost never a problem, but this year I've had 2 instances where, after repeatedly telling people, don't vent at the staff in your emails to me, I'm going to turn around and send them to staff. I still have people venting to staff, and I have to do that. So, but the point is, we need it all to go through staff. I mentioned we footnote all our changes so we don't get accused of that, of fooling people. You'll be annoyed by the number of footnotes. When we get to the end of the process, we take them out. But in the meantime, people have confidence that you are not fooling them. And finally, at the end of this process, when we get a restructured thing and we get the uses worked into it, that's essentially where you do your big push on public outreach. All of this will be public. We'll take comments. Many people will not read it until you tell them, this is it. This is what the draft is. So at that point, you have to do extra outreach through the web, through mailing lists, and that's when we will do it. Glenn, that may have been more of an update that you wanted, but that's my little introduction. Yeah?
You mentioned drafts and controlling the number of drafts
Yep.
and telling people this is it. In your timeline, though, you show, maybe not though, but in your timeline, you show 2 staff drafts and 2 public drafts. Is that?
Well, the staff draft is for the uses, and the second staff draft is for the overall restructuring of the code.
Okay.
So, that's all.
So just 2 public comments and 2
Yeah,
on one part and then the whole thing?
that's right. Put one out, have a staff draft, and then it's got PD over here, but we'll meet, we'll review it, then we'll go PD, and then we will have the same thing for the overall structure of the thing. Glenn, I didn't give you a chance to get a word in edgewise, actually, but are you thinking about taking this forward, I forget, for approval at the end, or are you going to wait and see if we can get some more things fixed before you take it
Well,
forward?
you know, I think what I struggle with is having a fixed document sitting there that I can't use.
Yeah.
And one thing I mentioned in the steering committee meeting is the staff spends a lot of time interpreting what uses are what, and there's something new, and is this close to that? So I guess we'll have to see. I could see reorganizing it and adopting it as a reorganized
So at the
code,
end of this
hopefully.
October thing, saying, look, guys, this is, we may be able to make it better, but this is a whole new thing that we ought to adopt now
Yeah.
before we do more work. Okay?
Yeah, and I'm afraid that if we set it aside, we're going to forget about it, and I don't want that to happen either. So I guess right now I'd be leaning to, if we can adopt it and use it in some kind of fashion, we should try and do that.
If we do that, what, would that change the way you put together what's under your contract currently?
No, I think what would happen is, I think at some point, just as multiple drafts of chapters confuse the public and confuse everybody else, multiple new codes would do it. So if you do that, I would say, by all means, if you want to adopt it in October or start it and then get it adopted in December of this year, go ahead. But don't do it over and over again. Say, I mean, if you get more funding for districts or for procedures, tell them, look, this is the halfway point, and we're going to do the rest of the work and then bring it back to you in another year. Yeah, just don't. It's okay to do it in halves. Don't do it in 4 or 5 parts because you die under the weight of the thing.
If this first part was adopted, what would be the logical next part?
Well, again, I think we would recommend thinking through your zone districts. Do you need any new ones? Can we consolidate any old ones? So that the use table is now tight. I'm making it tight top to bottom. We haven't got the money to do tight side to side yet, and to see whether or not you've got the right. I don't think it's too far off. To be very honest, you don't have all that many zone districts. It's just that it's kind of like building a house. I feel like we've gotten the bulk of what is the weakest part of the foundation, but before I worked on something else, I'd say, let's get the rest of the foundation right. So.
I have a general question for you regarding code, since you are the expert on the code. Your reputation procedure.
The firm is, anyway.
Code was originally adopted, utility and zoning, to establish uses, form, location, relationships, to preserve or to improve health, safety, and welfare.
Right.
That's the bare bones of code. Code has evolved over time. We now have the latest type of code is form-based code. Does code ever establish character?
That's the intent of form-based coding,
Right.
is to more accurately match either the existing character, so people can't do out-of-character things, or to establish your desired character. A lot of Denver, as many of you know, has a form-based code. It's fairly complicated. It's 1,000 pages long, has 107 zone districts. But the reason they have 107 zone districts is they put a lot of time into trying to match the character. In residential neighborhoods like mine, Dennis's, they tried to say, you're going to do something, it's very much like what's there now, because it really irritates people when you go into a nice neighborhood and build something out of character. And they ratcheted that down. Along the light rail lines and the bus lines, they said, we're not trying to ratchet it down, we're trying to define what we want here, and that's why all the multifamily dwellings are going up in Denver, is that they're by right. They said when they readopted it, look, this is a place where people ought to live, and we're not going to argue about it on each corner by corner by corner. This is a place where people ought to live, we're going to give you the height and the density, and if you're unhappy with it, then call your councilwoman, because we're not going to be able to do anything.
So is some code, not Littleton's, becoming more like design guidelines?
Not guidelines, but there was more design regulation in codes. For example, older codes just said, if you're in a residential neighborhood, you got to be 20 feet back. It's more likely these days that they would say, well, between 20 and 30 feet back, or between 15 and 25 feet back, because we don't want you taking a house and putting it on the back of the lot. That in 1920, we didn't care. Now people say, man, there's a street presence to this area, we don't want that. In commercial areas, more of them are saying, many codes are saying, in the downtown and the mixed-use corridors, we want the buildings near the street. So you will put your parker behind your building, or you'll put it beside or behind the building. So the answer to your question is, yes, most new codes address character through the form, more than, most codes are lightening up on their control of uses and ratcheting up their control on character.
So what I'm leading to, we're not going to have form-based code.
No. Well, unless you tell me to, but I have not been asked to do that.
It's not right now. In lieu of that, what's the next best document to regulate character?
Well, what we found, I've got a copy of it in my backpack. When we did the book we did on APA, American Planning Association, asked us to look around the country as to how people were using form-based controls. And it's not an on-off switch. The short answer is, I think when we get to that point, we will recommend to you some form controls. And by that, I just described what they were. In addition to a setback, maybe a range rather than just a minimum. That's a form-based control. If you say instead of the maximum height is 3 stories or 5, whatever you want to say, 3 stories, you give a range and say, we don't want 1-story buildings in this area, we want at least 2 stories because this is a dense corner. The answer to your question is not, there's not a name to it, it is a matter of weaving in the character or the form controls you want, and that's cherry picking. The normal ones are placement of building close to the street or back, parking is location in relation to the building, whether you want to have any requirements for windows or doors directly on the street or not. Those are the major ones, and most cities, if you just did those 3 things, people would say you don't have a form-based code, and I would say that's right. Do you have form controls? Yeah, we're controlling the form of building more than we did before. And that usually happens more in the commercial areas. So I think the next best thing, I wouldn't even say it's the next best thing. For most cities, it is the preferred option, is to get a revised code that blends more flexible use controls and more detailed form controls.
So,
It doesn't get all the way to a form-based code.
sorry to keep going on,
Yeah,
but outside of zoning code, what we hear in Littleton is that we want to preserve the small-town character of Littleton.
Right.
What does that mean?
Are you hearing that from residential neighborhoods or commercial or everybody?
From everybody. So my answer, I guess, or what I think that means is we have a downtown plan that is a set of guidelines. We have some sub-area plans we're going to start. We have some corridor plans we're going to work on. Those are probably the next best thing to defining character.
They are, although our advice is that I'm glad you raised this. You probably want to ask us to review those plans, those character-based plans for different areas. If we see content in there, You're right. Plans are a next best thing for character, but in many communities, if you really are serious about those design guidelines, we often get asked to take the ones that make sense and put them in the code. So you're not going to negotiate. A guideline is an advisory thing, usually.
It's not regulated, or
It's not regulation.
regulation.
Right, usually it's not, although many citizens think it is. After they've gone through the process of getting something adopted, they feel like it's gospel, it's going to be that way.
Right.
The answer is no, it was advice. But we're doing this in Albuquerque right now. They have 48 different area plans, each of which has a character statement and policies and zoning mixed into them. And we're trying to figure out what part of the character definition it's written in a plan, but the citizens think it's zoning, and they want at least the basics of that to wind up in the code. So that's kind of what we do. So if you're asking us to not forget about the character question, one of the things we could do is to read those plans and let you know, or you tell us which parts of those you mean seriously enough that you think some part of that should wind up in the code.
Which I think is a very good question. Thank you.
Coming back to what will get potentially adopted or not. So given that the scope of work for the zoning is just to restructure and not revise, does that have any implications of what you can develop from a land use perspective? So are there land uses that essentially you can put out there and say you need, but you have nowhere to put it right now because you don't have the right zoning to put it in?
Well,
so does that create...
I understand the question, yeah. That could come up, but I don't think it will come up. Usually once we create, and we already have created it, Tarek's working on it right now, kind of try to bring everything into a table that matches our format and the way we think about things. As we consolidate them, that will not be a problem. If we come up with new uses that most cities should have, I will ask Glenn and the advisory committee and you guys, do you want us to just leave a blank line in there and say we don't, or is it so obvious that everybody agrees there are only 2 districts where that would make sense? Then I would put them in there and footnote it and say this is a brand new use. But this happens all the time. This is, just to use an example, most older codes don't have anything on urban agriculture. So when you add urban agriculture, or you add live work, or you add an integrated retirement community, that's a new thing. And even though you weren't paid to kind of figure out the districts, you do your best and you footnote it and say, look, we put them in these districts. If you don't like it, complain. Your question would come up if there was clearly a use that a city like Littleton should have, but none of the districts fit it. It doesn't work. Then we might just leave a blank line. So yes. I hope I've been clear. It is unusual to break apart the use work and the zoning district work, but we can make it work. It's not the first time we've done it. Yeah.
Your public draft from February, I assume that is a blueprint for redoing the entire code, or is this what you have in your contract to do?
No, you're right. When that assessment, and this is why we've been trying to juggle this, the assessment talks, we're only doing what I described in my verbal here, but before we did that, we gave you advice as to what we think should be done in the remainder of the changes. So it walks through the structure that I laid out, but instead of just saying we would just carry over parking, we've said, when you guys get around to doing parking, this is what we would recommend that you do.
Second question concerns who, I guess. I'm trying to find out who. And that is, I'm all for density when it's a use by right. If anybody reading this analysis and recommendations, it's clear that all the changes are advocating greater density. I'm wondering who's driving the bus here. Are these your recommendations? Are you getting counsel from staff or from
there are
city council?
No. There are recommendations, but I didn't read it the same. I didn't intend to write it the same way you did. Most people, when they rewrite their codes, try to look at their plan and figure out where they want density, but we have not been told to upzone Littleton, and I don't think that's what we intended to say in there. So if that's how you read it, I'd kind of like to know.
I see a lilt. It's not overt, but there's a lilt leaning towards that.
Other than my general statement, if there are places in the community, and usually it's not residential at all, it's usually mixed use or corridors or downtown, where your plan says we need more walkable urbanism, we need more of that, this is the time to do it.
Right.
If I said that, I was saying it in a generic sense. It was not said because someone has told me that Littleton wants me to do that.
Wanted it just on the record. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much
Good
for
overview.
taking the time. It's going to be a fun project, and I predict you'll be happy with the results. So thanks very much for giving us the opportunity to work on it.
You bet.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. The neighborhood plans are back. It's like a rerun. Dennis, are you doing this, or Glenn?
I think I'm doing it tonight.
Okay. Yep.
What we did is we made the corrections to the plan that we talked about last time, and the update, and then we also made the corrections to the invitation to review the plan.
Where is this?
The zoning code's based on this. This is
for Littleton.
Littleton's going.
based on,
So you're the one advocating density, eh?
it's Norilisk, Russia, as a matter of fact. Actually, our consultant's been there, so it's very much like this. It's really a warehouse district for people.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Love that style.
So this is
So I'll change that. Distracting. Sorry.
No one's going to remember who you are unless you move your
Uh-oh.
placard.
We start calling each other comrade here? Okay.
I could have pictures of my dog or something.
Misspelled.
Is that why this is in black and white? To make it look really bleak and...
Oh, man.
Feisty bunch. Bring the zoning guy back.
Dennis, continue.
Please. Take it away.
all right. You should have two documents. One is the neighborhood goals and policies that you've been working on revising, and we made the changes that we talked about in the last couple of meetings to that. And then also, more significant for tonight, I think, is this preface document that you worked on. We're going to use the cover letter for what we put online, and we're looking at actually posting this on Open Littleton, and that will be an opportunity for people to actually give comments. And we're asking specifically, are these things that have been accomplished, given the criteria that you use, it's been accomplished, it's no longer relevant. Do you think that we've done a good job of doing those things? And so that's the intent. Is there something else that should be omitted using those criteria, or is it something that we shouldn't have omitted using those criteria? And I guess to some degree that we could ask for, if someone doesn't agree with the criteria as well, it could be something else. Yeah, Mark?
Well, let's see, this is the preface. Let the board hear from you. There's a little danger in here. I think it needs to be expanded slightly. Danger is that obviously we are just doing some gentle house cleaning here. And then you're inviting the public to comment on it. I guarantee you the public will come back with new things that they want in the neighborhood. I think we need to make it a little clearer that we are just, we want comments on the house cleaning, but in addition, in case you have other new things you want in the future neighborhood plan rewrites, we'd be happy to get those comments, but we're not going to be incorporating them now. We'll save them for the future, rewrite.
But send those to us as well and identify.
So if you could just, like an extra couple of or an extra paragraph there.
Okay. Everybody on board with
Because if they don't see, if they recommend something, they don't see it in the final one, they're going to say, nobody listens to me.
that? Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, because you're going to get all the comments.
Right, we are.
Whether you want them or not, yeah.
You need to separate the ones that are going to be utilized and ones that are not
Okay.
at this point.
Good. Okay, great. Other comments from people?
Yeah, I'll just say, I do not like the R's in here. They're very distracting.
The R's.
The R's? Oh,
If you look at where it
the large
says
ones?
Berry, the R, no, the small R's, they're really like compacted.
Oh, really? Oh, with the typeset? With the font?
Yeah.
Pick a different font, please.
It's a terrible font.
I've seen that, yeah. The corridor looks like
Okay.
Commodore.
I'll check I'll change the font. Good.
It's a little tongue-in-cheek,
yeah,
but
it's
they
just
are kind of weird.
Smashed.
Anybody have a recommendation? We use Calibri, Arial,
Calibri's
Camry.
cool. This doesn't look like Calibri.
Don't get cute, just,
Yeah, don't be cute. Stick to what everybody knows.
The best one.
Okay.
I have a comment on the timeline of the plan, I guess page 3 of 4. I see what you're going for in saying that C is the adoption of a comprehensive plan, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But C just looks way out of place there. I'd just call it 1.
Call it 1, okay.
And just start there. I understand exactly what you're doing, but it just doesn't make sense to me. The other is that the way the graphic looks, the 10 is abnormally large.
Yes.
And maybe even just give it the same hash marks as everything else might do. It'd be a visual break there.
Gotcha.
But it implies a greater importance than any of those others by its size. And I just think to be cautious there.
Okay.
Were you saying you want to turn this up to 11?
I think our speakers go to 11.
I just had one little comment. On the second page, second paragraph, it says the comprehensive plan does not include neighborhood plans for the areas that have not been annexed into the city the time the plan was written. I feel like we can't say the 1981 plan enough, just so people are,
Good.
mix them up, folks.
yeah, here we go again.
Good point.
Yeah, so I don't feel like we can't say it enough.
Great. Thanks, Jerry.
I think you did a good job also, by the way. So-
Enough detail and yet brief enough, hopefully, that people read it. Is that-
Right,
okay.
yeah. Succinct.
Brenda, did you have?
I honestly didn't have a lot of time to review this. I think that, coming back to Mark's comment, I think that's the most critical element to this.
Okay.
A word that I'm tripping up over, not that I have a suggestion otherwise, but it's, when we talk about these updated plans, it infers that we've truly changed the plan. So I think coming back, I think we have to figure out a way to really level set that this was, a house cleaning. I don't think the house cleaning might be, maybe we could use it, but it simplifies it. It makes it very clear. We keep using it over and over again every time we talk about it. I know it doesn't sound professional and all of that, but again, we're just trying to make sure that when people read this, they know what we've done, what our intent was, and what we expect from them. So that would, just echoing Mark's concern there.
Intended to simplify seems to capture what house cleaning is.
I don't see this at first glance, but we had 3 criterias that we used.
It's in there.
Are they in here? Okay, so I think as long as those are outlined, that gives some guidance.
Page
Where are
3.
they?
Page
They're
3.
Page 3 at the bottom.
3?
Oh, projects, there we go, A, B, and C.
Okay. Good.
The thought is we'll post it on Open Littleton, we'll advertise it on Nextdoor and with Littleton, on Littleton Gov website with an article, Littleton Report, and also on Channel 8. We'll do a banner on others.
I have one comment on number 10. Does it confuse the matter to introduce the corridors when this is really about the neighborhoods? Or is it just giving them kind of a heads up what's coming?
The thought was just to give a heads up with what's coming. The board is working on updating the plan itself, and here's kind of the process that we're going through, why we haven't done the entire thing. Was the intent, at least.
You could make it, other future high-priority plans or something, just get the word future in there.
Okay.
That's the heads-up notation. Coming attractions.
Yeah, I think it's going to be important that, I think that's a good point, Randy, because there's one thing we want them to do here, is to comment on these plans. And so while I think some of this other information is nice to know, I don't think it's helping us to achieve what our goal is, which is input on the current plans.
I don't know, when I first looked at this, let the board hear from you comes up twice, and it was like the first thing I noticed on these pages. I didn't mean to interrupt you, sorry, but...
I think it's important to let us hear from you specific to these plans. Otherwise, again, we just risk getting a lot, which is okay to get that, but we're just not ready to do anything with it. And once we are ready, we're going to have to go through the process again, right, for the corridor plans. But I don't want to confuse the matter because some individuals may have a very vested interest in a particular corridor or what's going on in a corridor, but really what we want that individual to focus on is the neighborhood. It's something that I think we have to decide where we, make our investment of time, resources, and the input that we're getting back. I think it's about just honing in on what our goal is here, which is getting feedback on the neighborhoods, is my opinion.
Why is planning board not a proper noun?
It depends on who you talk to.
It's a big discussion item, believe me.
Do you want to use it on
The style that...
No, it's not an ego thing. It's just very understated throughout the entire document, but yet it refers that, let the board talk to you, the planning board. And it doesn't seem consistent.
It's the style.
Because it's not
that's in
capitalized, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Adopted,
Yeah,
so-
which is how I was brought up, is it's a title, so it ought to be capitalized, but we have grammar experts that tell us no, we're incorrect, so.
Are you one of them? Is that correct or not correct? A rule from the jury.
Yeah, let's turn the tables on the press.
AP style is if I say Littleton Planning Board, I capitalize everything. If I just say Planning Board,
Oh,
Or change it to Littleton.
No, geez.
very good.
Seemed right to me.
Thank you, Andrew.
That's a good point. One other comment on the very first paragraph, join the process. And it's just a clarification of where we are in the process. With the recent adoption of the citywide and downtown neighborhood plans, first of all, the citywide is actually part of the comprehensive plan. And this update of the Littleton's neighborhood plans, the city is moving forward with its commitment to update our comprehensive plan. Well, there's two pieces to that. The citywide plan is step one of updating the comprehensive plan. In other words, we've already updated part of it. It may be a detail, but there's been confusion, I think, among the public about what is the comp plan.
Sure. And my thought is that the downtown neighborhood plan is also part of the conference plans, are all the neighborhood plans. And so each of these individual plans we do is an element of the larger conference plan, which is the framework. It's the
Right, so I
umbrella.
just wonder if there shouldn't be a few words that say something to the effect that the citywide and downtown neighborhood plans, which are the first part of updating the comprehensive plan, the final part is updating our neighborhood plans to finally arrive at a complete update of the entire comprehensive plan. That's not worded good, but that's what I'm wondering, if we need to continue to drive home the fact that the citywide plan and the downtown plan is part of the comprehensive plan. The neighborhood plans are just the other part of it. And at the end of this process, we will have a complete new comprehensive plan. And it will no longer be called updated. It'll be the comprehensive plan.
Yeah, we can work on that language and see. Yeah.
That's all my comments.
One thing I really liked about this, Dennis, was the join the process, review neighborhood plan, let the board hear from you, because it's join the process by reviewing your neighborhood plan and let the board hear from you. So, I mean, it really kind of at first glance, you're like, I know exactly what you want me to do. You want me to be a part of the process, then you're telling me what to do to be a part of that process and who is essentially the recipient of it. So I think that was well done.
Any other comments? All right.
Well, are we, I guess maybe you talked about it when I left the room, but are we ready to put this out? I guess we're kind of waiting on the board to nod your head and...
We got a little rewrite. It'd be nice to get another, with our comments in it,
Sure.
and have us look at it one more time, via email.
Do you want to come back in the next meeting and
No.
sign
Just
off on it?
email.
Yeah, just email.
I think it'd be better
and
to
kind of
get
like-
email responses, because it needs to get online.
Okay, good.
Very good.
For the record, I'd like to be known as a proper noun.
I'm with you.
For the record.
But I would say, Dennis, just put a deadline on it. It's kind of like speak now or
Yeah.
or move on.
Yeah, so if we get comments by the end of the week, that'd be great.
Good.
All right.
Good work.
Excellent.
Thank you, Dennis.
Well, what I'd like to do is talk about a work plan, but I put together some other information. I wanted to put it out to the board. Let me... open. So one of the things that I've heard a lot recently is planning board meetings, and perhaps we haven't had enough meetings. And I think probably as a precursor to the discussion of what we're doing, I think it's important to kind of address that maybe the criticism isn't lack of meetings, but we're not accomplishing goals, and perhaps that's it. So I was concerned because I've never heard a criticism that you're not having enough meetings. Usually it's we're meeting too much and we're not getting anything done. I mean, that's normally what I've heard, I guess, in my 30 years of doing this. So it's kind of interesting. In fact, not too many business owners have said, boy, if only we could have more meetings, we'd get more accomplished. But what I did was I went back and looked at 15 years of planning board meetings, and this is a graph that kind of shows that. And the red items are your public hearings. So that's your rezoning, that's adopting urban renewal plans, that's adopting neighborhood plans where you're having a public hearing and folks are coming in, and hopefully you're taking action at the end of that. And then we have administrative items, which can be subdivision approvals, or it could be conditional, well, not conditional use permits, because those are public hearings. And then you have your study session items, which is like what we're having tonight. So we've got 3 items that would fit under that light blue area where we're discussing items, hopefully bringing them forward to some kind of action. So I guess in my mind, when you look at the business of the board, the red and the dark purple are really the action items. That's the majority of your workload. You're accomplishing things. You're getting tasks done. And yes, if you go back to 2014, you had 17 meetings. And that's what the jagged line is the actual number of meetings that the planning board had. You also, in addition to last year, I didn't count them, but we had our meet, greet, and eat where we got information on the neighborhood plans, and certainly many of the planning board members attended that. We had the Urban Land Institute meeting with the city council. And of course, we had a neighborhood meeting with Heritage High School. So we definitely put in the meetings. So that would bump that number up to about 22 meetings. But I think it shows we're being very efficient. You had 17 meetings, you accomplished over 25 actions, and you talked about another 10 items that are long-range planning. If you go over the history of Littleton, at least past the 15 years, I think what concerns me is areas like this. So if you look as a manager, you say, wow, I had 26 meetings, didn't have a whole lot of actions taken, but there was a whole lot of discussion going on. And I think maybe that's not the most effective. This is, of course, the recession, so there's a lot of staff time, there's maybe more board time, and the feeling was maybe time was unlimited. In that particular area, Dennis knows this really well because he spent 26 of those meetings, I think, talking about the downtown neighborhood plan, and that went on for 3-some years. I would have to say that's not a board being the highest effective as they could. And then when you get into 2005, a lot of the purple areas really were long-range things. In fact, you actually were creating a new plan, the Littleton 2030 plan, that unfortunately never got adopted. So I guess looking back, if we're going to look hindsight, and I love hindsight because it's almost 2020, you could say, well, we kind of wasted the recession there. We could have updated perhaps the zoning code or the general plan. So I wanted to kind of give that context of where we were. I don't think you did a bad job last year. I think you were very effective and you were very efficient with your time. That's how I would cast it. But going forward, let's talk about what you've got on your plate for this year. We just talked about the neighborhood plan, and what I've done is looked at the next 2 years and basically broke it by quarter because I don't have that much detail on a lot of these projects yet. But hopefully we've got the neighborhood plan. We could wrap it up. And I think we're still talking about doing an initial adoption where we fix it and then the board makes a recommendation and then council adopts it. Are we all on the same page there?
Or this little house club?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So that's what I'm trying to show here, and the planning board will see it again, and you'll have a public hearing on it, and then the council will have a public hearing on it. Yeah, Andrew?
Where do specifically around the mineral area and the 2 train stations, where does the professional review? So a lot of the times we find ourselves in either overlap or dependent on this outside study that's going on to provide us information.
Right.
Where in this map does it say we get that before we start the review process so that we're not overlapping or redundant with that effort?
You mean when do you get a review copy before
We
you
can
have
agree.
a public hearing?
We could agree right now that, hey, let's take a look at the mineral plan. Let's all draw pictures and talk about it a lot.
Right.
And then what seems to have been happening is then 3 months later is, there was this professional group that was doing something very similar, and we see how theirs mirrors yours. And I think that's out of sequence in its presentation. I would rather see if we're funding projects or receiving funding for projects to do area plans, that we follow, after the pros have done their work instead of being redundant with it, unless it's more appropriate to do it otherwise. But it seems that that always shows up after we've already done what we've done, and it doesn't seem in sequence to me. Maybe that's a personal opinion.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what you mean by that.
Let me restate the question. In each of these places, are we going to receive professional draft prior to embarking on each of the area plans?
Yes. Okay, let me just walk through that. So neighborhood plan was totally your effort and staff effort.
Right.
So there's no money involved. 2A and B, as I mentioned, we got $175,000 in federal money, and we're matching it, and we're hiring professionals on 2A and 2B.
When?
Right now, because we have federal dollars, there is a bit more bureaucracy. Okay, so I'm expecting it to be by this summer. We'll be out on the street for those 2 studies. And the funding staggered. So we'll do the Mineral Avenue plan. We'll roll right into the downtown plan. Per here. So I'm showing second quarter. We will be underway. I don't know what the total process is. I just showed a red line for public involvement, but that will be happening this year.
So given that study will begin, the professional consultants will come in Q2, you said the summer. maybe Q3. So I guess the question is, what would we be doing as a planning board in Q2 if that study has not begun yet? What would be the directive for the planning board?
So that's Mineral and Downtown. Now, I'll tell you with Santa Fe what my plan is here, because these two area plans are pretty geographically close. So they're going to be looking at least a mile around each radius. Dennis and I have talked to RTD. They wouldn't have an issue with us perhaps doing a parallel process with that consultant on the Santa Fe corridor. So I think we could potentially be working on all three. But I don't know enough to actually promise you that. Today, we met with consultants on the Littleton Boulevard corridor to hire, again, a professional to do the Littleton Boulevard corridor study. I think we'll be under contract this month, and you'll certainly be starting that in quarter two. You'll start seeing that. And believe me, I'll make sure the planning board is involved to the nth degree. So that'll be something you'll definitely see. We talked about the zoning ordinance rewrite, and then staff has got some zoning code rewrites that we're doing on our own that we'll be bringing forward. You saw the CA district. We're going to bring forward the R5 district. The downtown neighborhood plan recommended some changes to the R5 district, so we're going to meet with some of the citizens and bring that forward to you as well. And then, of course, we've been talking about accessory dwelling units, and I suspect we'll be into that this year, too.
So I think, given that, I think 2A, the Mineral Avenue Station area plan, is a quarter too soon for us to look at it. Because what I'm hearing, I guess, what would we be looking at now other than beginning to draft it, but yet we've gotten a consultant to begin to draft, but that won't start until Q3.
Yeah, I think one of the first things you'd look at is the public participation plan. So what they would recommend, if you think there's other ways to reach the community, I think the planning board's the one to make those recommendations. So, excuse me, I think you'll see the scope.
We'll see the scope in Q2 so we can comment on
And then the public
it.
participation process,
Okay.
right.
Okay.
And then certainly all those public meetings, of which I don't know what they are, so they're not up here, the planning board's got to be involved in that. And then you're the policy folks, so any recommendations, you're the ones that are going to vet those and decide whether that's
So you're almost
good or
looking
bad.
at us to be part of the planning phase of that work. So as they're defining what the work is going to be and how they're going to reach out to the public, your timelines here would suggest we're part of that planning process with the consultant.
I think so.
But would
Right.
it be where we have a kickoff meeting where we tell them our concerns, what we know about the past corridor study, Santa Fe corridor study, what our goals, objectives are. So it's not like we're just hiring a consultant, just, hey, do your thing and get back to us. Or they're only talking to staff. But no, they're dealing with us up front.
Right.
Or also maybe we get some initial public input. Not at the end of when, it's a fait accompli, here it is. We get initial public comment as to what they would like, perhaps, just maybe via email.
Any private consultant, part of the process is going to include from day one interviews of stakeholders.
Right.
One of those interviews is planning board. And so it's not going to be, we don't see it until the draft. It's going to be, we're involved from the very beginning, either through one-on-one meetings with the consultant or within a neighborhood context. There's various venues that it could occur.
To that end, then, can we get, prior to their public comment, previous drafts, previous projects, previous studies done on that area for review in our packet?
Sure. Yeah, the only ones we have are what ULI did for the mineral. I don't think we have anything specific to the downtown station. But, right, that's what that process was. Here's some key issues that you need to look at when you get into detailed study.
Just for a refresher, if we're going to walk back in, it would be nice to have that
Yeah,
packet available.
absolutely.
Along with that, other public comment or notes about controversy during that time.
During the ULI, look at it?
Just any background information
Okay.
that sets the stage for what we're walking into.
There was two studies from the Urban Land Institute.
There has
I
been
think
two.
we've gotten them before. By the way, the Santa Fe corridor plan, are you going to try to weasel in that, for a freebie with these guys, since they're doing a half-mile overlap or radius from the,
That's the strategy.
or do we have to pay extra to get it?
I'm sure it'll cost extra, but there ought to be some economies of scale there.
It should be.
Yeah.
The other, just for a refresher, the Littleton Boulevard corridor, that's at stem to stern from east of the courthouse all the way to Broadway?
Right, we did from the railroad, basically to Broadway.
Okay.
So, and that grew out of a council goal because they got approval of a streetscape plan for downtown, and that got extended out to Broadway for Littleton Boulevard. So I jumped in and said, well, wait a minute, you need the policy, right, before you get into the design of the street. So it's a three-part process. So it's the downtown, no, not the downtown, the Littleton Boulevard corridor plan. That'll be part of the comprehensive plan. And then they'll do some more detailed design of what's actually in the right-of-way for Main Street, Alamo, and Littleton Boulevard. So, and the idea is then with that detail, we'll have costs so we can start doing capital improvement planning for making, a better pedestrian environment, really, and to create more of a complete street.
So this work is more of a design guideline that we would then want to adapt into the Littleton Boulevard corridor plan as part of our comprehensive plan?
It would be your chapter of the Littleton corridor plan, right? One of those areas, so we talked about Littleton Boulevard, Broadway, Santa Fe. We also, for the heck of it, threw in Mineral and County Line, just to cover them all. So this would be one of them. And this is kind of a key one, right?
But the streetscape plan isn't going to go into all of the necessary, there's a lot that we have to address for the Littleton Boulevard corridor. The streetscape is one component of it. So this would be a part of the broader Littleton corridor plan that we will develop.
Right, yeah, good point. So, yeah, you have the policy, which is the corridor plan. Streetscape is one way of implementing it. Do we need wider sidewalks? Do we need a tree lawn? Do we need more street furniture, wayfinding? And then zoning would be another way of implementing it.
But Corinne, this project does include the corridor plan itself.
Oh, it does?
Yes.
Like what to put there, retail, whatever. Okay.
Yeah.
So from the looks of the timeline, Q3 and Q4 could be a busy time for the board. If a consultant's working on the stationary plan and a consultant's working on the Boulevard, Littleton Boulevard, and you're submitting code rewrites and submitting other amendments, staff amendments. So that would include potentially meetings beyond planning board if we're doing neighborhood meetings and
Yeah,
with the consultants.
I would expect it to.
So it could be a busy time.
It could be. And then you have your normal caseload, which I don't really think is going to change from last year. So,
Any work around the lift projects or anything associated with that we would also have to participate in?
that's a real good question, and I don't know the answer. Actually, Karina raised some of the same questions. What does it mean? Our city attorney's out of town, so maybe we have a special item just to talk about what's the vote mean and what's it mean going forward. To me, and what I mentioned to Karina is really, so you've approved those plans, but before any kind of project comes forward, it means we need a vote of the people, and it cannot include condemnation, right? Because both of them were approved.
Glenn, I want to just call out some wording here. It's zoning code rewrite. So what we heard earlier was not a rewrite of the zoning code. We heard a restructure. So is this something else?
No, I'm sorry. You're right.
Okay.
It's really, so it's a rewrite of the uses,
Okay.
and it's a recodification of the sections, reordering. But yeah, that would be, but it's what you heard earlier. So is there anything we're perhaps missing? I think we're covered. Now, I didn't put anything for Broadway, County Line, Mineral. That's a TBD, to be determined. So, maybe that's a board process or something. I don't know what it is. But I think what we try to do is provide consultants where we could use them, and there's really three reasons you use them. One is you don't have staff time, which is true. Perhaps you don't have expertise, and I would say to a certain degree, I think we do very well when we hire an expert to come in and make recommendations or provide cover. And I'd say that's true also. So I think we've done pretty well. We've leveraged other people's money, and I think it's what's best for Littleton. So I think that's ultimately what my goal is to get the 30-year comprehensive plan updated and get the 40-year-old zoning code updated.
Glenn, the only thing I would add to this is, under what assumption did you build this plan? So coming back to the scale of administrative study sessions, et cetera. So you would have had to make an assumption that we'd have X amount of time for study sessions, X amount of time for public hearings, et cetera, to develop this plan. Just so, again, we know what the basis was. So we can say, okay, we can deliver this if this assumption holds true. If all of a sudden every single meeting is a public hearing, we'll never get to any of this, right? So I think it's just, almost to cover our butts, so to speak.
Yeah, if we get a lot of current cases in, you may have 26 meetings.
Yeah, so I think it's, if things remain the same, that we can expect 30% of our time, whatever the numbers were, 30% of our time can be study sessions, then that's what this was based on, then that's great. If we find we have 50%, well, then we absolutely better deliver on this. If it's less, then let's just make sure we recognize that and then can make a conscious decision of which one of these do we push out.
Just being a manager.
Well, you're not going to push out the consultant's timeline necessarily because they're on a timeline.
Right, that's right.
Yeah.
And that's a form of prioritizing, right?
Right.
If we got money coming in, we need to use that money, sure.
Right.
I've always been an advocate that when we finish this little house cleaning of the neighborhood plans, we actually hoof it out to the neighborhood. And I don't see time for that, which is disappointing. In that, when are we going to hoof it out to the neighborhoods? When are we going to repeat Heritage under better circumstances?
Well, and all I can say is what I think I'm reading the council is do these corridor plans. Those are your priority. If they tell us differently, I guess we try and work that in.
Someday, yeah.
Well, maybe for optics, given that you do have 3 years here, maybe it's the tail end of 2016, our calendar frees up a little bit. So that's when you would be introducing phase 2 of the neighborhood plans, right?
Good point. Right. It could be in that area.
So again, it doesn't leave that question out there.
Yeah.
And on any of these projects, we'll get a much more detailed timeline. So what I'm really trying to indicate is there is going to be a public process. We're definitely going to have the planning board involved in all of these to a great degree. And to build on what Randy said, it doesn't do any good for a consultant to go off and write something in a vacuum and come to you and you scratch your heads and you don't approve it. That's the last thing they want. So they're going to want your fingerprints all the way through the process.
Speaking of consultants, just what I've read and the presentations that I've been to for the zoning code rewrite, thank God we've got outside consultant. That's going to make the job so much quicker.
It's a big job.
They know what they're doing, and I don't agree with everything, and that's to be discussed. How far do we let them dictate policy versus us dictate policy, and then they execute?
Yeah.
But I'm awfully glad we have them. I'm hoping that works out with the Mineral Station and the downtown station and Littleton Corridor.
Yeah, and believe me, I wish we could just write them a check and write the whole code.
Yes.
Because I've seen the final product, and it's really good. And staff does spend a lot of time interpreting that code and trying to figure it out. But really, part of it was, are there sections that staff can write as well? and not necessarily use them. So that was kind of our strategy with taking little incremental steps with the rewrite of the code.
Well, you've got, that blueprint that you can...
Yeah, they did a really good assessment on it, yeah. So hopefully we don't hit another recession, but yeah, that would help us get some of these things done, I think.
All right.
Anything else?
I think it's a very good job of putting everything on a timeline, and I commend you for pushing things and getting the corridor plans and code update, and good job.
Glenn, do you want to share that with us?
Sure, I can send it to you.
Just for this type A's, you know.
Yeah.
I took a picture of it.
There you go.
Get your camera out. Phone.
I want the real deal.
For, I guess, just a preview for our next meeting, so we do have a couple of action items, and subdivision approval, and then we're going to start talking about the R5 with you as well. The R5, the amendments to the R5
Okay.
section, just some ideas before we go too far, and we definitely want to meet with residents as well with that.
Are you willing to give us a preview of
What is it?
what you're proposing for R5?
Well, there's a couple of things. One of them, CA, kind of gave you a preview. So we have the same thing in R5 where high-density multifamily is allowed, but when it comes to ownership and splitting lots, it's very restrictive. So we'll try and create a minimum lot size that makes sense so you can see more ownership projects in the R5. There's a section of the code that says if you're a CA use next to an R5, you can get a conditional use and put a parking lot in R5. That was something identified with the downtown neighborhood plan, that perhaps that's not a good thing in an R5 neighborhood. Quite frankly, I don't know that we have any, and we might just delete it. But those are the biggest things. I think we might actually define what a townhouse is to kind of identify what can happen on those minimum lot sizes. So.
Oh, you know what, we started talking about the retreat, planning board retreat. At the last meeting, we hadn't identified timing. I wonder if, as we look at our work schedule here, what would be optimal timing, given what we're working on? So based on, the availability of the board, the staff, et cetera, definitely looks like later in the summer as opposed to earlier in the summer. So should we aim towards more of a Q3 as we start planning? I know we owe you guys a little bit more structure on agenda and what we're trying to accomplish, but just, at first glance, to me, I'm leaning towards Q3 might be a better timing for us. Thoughts?
We have new members coming on, too, next month, so I think that would be better to give them an opportunity to get up to speed.
So we'll pencil it in Q3. And at some point, we want to decide what you want to talk about.
That's a Saturday affair, I assume, right? Just one day?
Yeah, that's what we did last time.
Yeah, the Breckenridge. It didn't start out as 2 days, but it ended up that way.
Go to the Breckenridge Brewery for 2 days.
Believe me, looking through those old agendas, yeah, I saw what you guys did back in the day.
Did anybody go to the birthday party? The 125th? How was it?
Jerry Valdez and I were bartending on an emergency basis for 3 straight hours. It was a heck of a good time.
That's great.
And the Breckenridge Brewery provided the refreshments, quite good. It was uproarious. It was a great time.
I got to see the fireworks. I didn't get to join the party, but good.
A lot of fun. Good food.
Happy birthday, Littleton. Anything else? We're adjourned.